Emo, your skin is cold. You don't breathe unless you're speaking. You broke a grown man's arm without effort. Your doctor published a textbook in 1903 and hasn't aged a day. Your guards drink blood, not coffee. And that wine in your glass isn't wine. Lucian set the goblet down. He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. You are dangerously observant, Lenora Bellamy. I was a nursing student. We're trained to notice what people try to hide. A silence fell. The candles flickered. Somewhere in the house, a clock struck 8, the sound rolling through the walls like a heartbeat. Give me your hand, Lucian said. Lenora hesitated. Then she reached across the white tablecloth and offered her hand. He took it. His hand was large, enveloping hers completely, and it was cold. Not cool, cold. Like gripping a stone that had been sitting in a winter river. He placed her palm flat against his chest. She felt the silk of his shirt. The hard muscle beneath. She waited for the heartbeat. Thump. Then silence. 5 seconds. 10. Thump. 1 beat per minute. Maybe less. Not enough to sustain anything living. She didn't pull her hand away. Vampire, she said quietly. The word sounded absurd. It sounded like a word from a paperback novel left on a bus seat. But here in this candlelit hall, with her hand on his silent chest, it was the only word that fit. Lucian released her hand and leaned back. We prefer kindred. But the myths are mostly accurate, except the garlic. That's just an Italian superstition. He waited. Lenora could see it, the tension coiled in his frame, the almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw. He was waiting for her to scream, to run, to do what any rational person would do when they discovered they were having dinner with a predator. Lenora picked up her fork. She thought about Kyle. Kyle who was human. Kyle who had warm blood and a beating heart and breath that smelled of beer. Kyle who had broken her ribs and laughed while she crawled. Then she thought about the man across the table. The dead thing. The monster. Who had driven through the rain to save a stranger. Who had carried her like she was made of glass. Who was sitting here now watching her with an expression that looked terrifyingly like the fear of rejection. Kyle is a human, Lenora said, and he tried to kill me. You're a monster, and you saved me. She stabbed a piece of potato. I'll take my chances with the monster. She put the potato in her mouth. Lucian Ashford stared at her, and for the first time in 300 years, the king of the city had absolutely nothing to say. But the peace didn't last. It never does. 3 miles east, in a bar that smelled of sawdust and desperation, Kyle Daggett sat in a booth with his arm in a cast and murder in his bloodshot eyes. He had spent 3 days looking for Lenora. Her apartment was empty, cleaned out, her phone disconnected. Her brother Sawyer had answered the door with a look that promised violence, and Kyle, despite the whiskey courage, had enough survival instinct left to back away. But he hadn't stopped. He had talked to people, pulled in favors from the kind of men who operated in the gray spaces between the law and the gutter. He had described the man who broke his arm, the pale skin, the impossible speed, the eyes that weren't human to anyone who would listen. Most people laughed at him, one didn't. The man sitting across from Kyle in the booth didn't have a name that Kyle knew. He went by Rook. He was lean-weathered with scars on his hands and eyes that had seen things that would break lesser men. He ran an organization that didn't appear on any government registry. They called themselves the Order. They had been hunting vampires for 400 years. Lucian Ashford, Rook said, studying a photograph on his phone. The photo was grainy, taken from a surveillance camera outside the Elm Street apartment building. It showed a figure carrying a woman through the rain. You're sure this is the man? That's him, Kyle said. His broken arm throbbed. That's the freak who jumped me. He didn't jump you. Rook's voice was flat, patient, the voice of a man who dealt in facts. You were beating a woman and a 300-year-old vampire king intervened. I need to understand why. She's mine. She texted him by accident and he showed up like some kind of... The woman, Rook interrupted. What's her name? Lenora. Lenora Bellamy. Rook leaned back. His fingers drummed the table. Ashford doesn't intervene for humans. Not once in 3 centuries. He doesn't protect. He doesn't rescue. He certainly doesn't bring them into the estate. He looked at Kyle with eyes that saw a tool, not a person. Which means either she's something special or he's losing his mind. Either way, I want to know which. He slid a phone across the table. You're going to help me find out. Kyle took the phone. And then I'll give you what you want, her address. Kyle smiled. It was an ugly thing twisted by rage and cheap whiskey. Outside the bar, the rain continued to fall. Vivienne Duval arrived at the Ashford estate on the 5th evening, unannounced, uninvited, and immaculately dressed. She stepped out of a black sedan, her heels clicking on the wet gravel. Her dark hair swept back from a face that had been beautiful for 4 centuries. She moved through the front doors as though she owned them, and once, a long time ago, she nearly had. Vivian and Lucian had been lovers in the 1800s, a century of passion, politics, and power. She had wanted the throne beside him. He had wanted solitude. When it ended the way things end between immortals, slowly then all at once, with wounds that took decades to close. She was here now because Aldrich Fell had called her. She was here because when Aldrich whispered the word mender, the blood in her ancient veins had run cold. Whitmore intercepted her in the foyer. Lady Duval, we were not expecting Whitmore. She smiled, showing teeth that were too perfect. Don't pretend you're surprised. Where is he, boss? Mr. Ashford is indisposed. And the girl, a pause. What girl, my lady? Vivian's smile sharpened. The one whose blood smells like a miracle. She found Lenora in the library. Lenora looked up from a medical text to find a woman standing in the doorway who looked like she'd been carved from moonlight and malice. Tall, pale, dressed in black silk. Her eyes were dark, ancient, and amused in a way that made Lenora's skin prickle. So bueno, Vivian said, walking into the room with the casual authority of someone who had walked through many rooms in many centuries. You're the stray. Lenora closed the book. And you are Vivienne Duval. I'm an old friend of Lucian's. The word friend carried enough subtext to fill a novel. I wanted to see what all the fuss was about. A human. In the estate. Lucian hasn't allowed that since... She trailed off. Deliberately. Since what? Lenora asked. Vivian tilted her head. Since Elise. The name landed like a stone dropped into still water. He kept her here too. Vivian continued, settling into a chair as though she planned to stay. In this very wing, 200 years ago, she was special, just like you. He adored her, protected her, kept her behind these walls like a bird in a cage. What happened to her? Vivian's eyes met Lenora's. There was no malice in them now, just something cold and factual. The council killed her. They were afraid of what she could do, of what she made Lucian capable of. And Lucian, she paused. He didn't stop them. He tried, but he failed. And he's been punishing himself for it ever since. Lenora's heart was hammering. Why are you telling me this? Because someone should, because he won't, and because you deserve to know what you've walked into before the cage door closes. Vivian stood smoothing her dress. She walked to the door, then paused. Ask him about the portrait in the lower gallery, she said. Third room on the left, the one with the curtain over it. Then she was gone. Lenora found the portrait at midnight. She moved through the sleeping house with a candle she'd taken from the dining hall, her slippers silent on the stone floors. Down the main staircase, through the lower gallery, past landscapes and battle scenes and portraits of Ashford ancestors. Third room on the left, a small chamber, one painting. Covered with a velvet curtain so dark it seemed to absorb the candlelight. She pulled the curtain aside, and her blood went cold. The woman in the portrait could have been her twin. Not exactly. The style was different. The clothing was early 19th century. The hair was swept up in a style 200 years out of fashion. But the face, the jawline, the shape of the eyes, the way the subject held her chin slightly raised, as though daring the painter to look away. A brass plaque at the bottom of the frame read Elise Marchandau, 1802. Lenore stared at the painting until the candle burned down to a stub. Then she walked upstairs, found Lucian's study, and opened the door without knocking. He was sitting at his desk, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He looked up. His face betrayed nothing but his eyes. Those cold gray eyes flickered when he saw her expression. You found the portrait, he said. She looks like me. Yes. Was she a mender too? A pause long enough for the fire to crackle and settle. Yes. And the council killed her. Yes. And you couldn't stop them. Lucian set his glass during random. He placed both hands flat on the desk. His fingers were trembling. Barely. But she saw it. I tried, he said. I fought. I killed 3 council members. I burned a treaty that had stood for 500 years, and it wasn't enough. They took her in the day while I slept, while I was helpless. His voice cracked on the last word, a fissure in a wall of granite. I woke up and she was gone, a pile of ash in the courtyard. Lenora felt tears on her cheeks. She wasn't sure when they had started. Am I her replacement? She whispered. Is that why you came? Is that why you kept me? Because I look like a dead woman and my blood does something useful. Lucian stood up. He came around the desk. He stopped 3 feet from her, close enough to touch, but not touching. His face was stripped in man's. No mask, no king. Just a man who had been alone for 2 centuries and was terrified of the answer to her question. I don't know, he said. I don't know why I came that night. I don't know why your message felt like a hand reaching out from the dark. I don't know if I'm protecting you or protecting a memory. He swallowed. The sound was audible in the silent room. But I know this. Elise is gone, and you are here, and you are not her. You are braver. You are louder. You walked into a room of vampires and pulled silver from a wound because you couldn't stand to hear someone scream. Elise never did that. Elise was gentle. You are fierce, Mom. He looked at her with eyes that held 300 years of solitude. I don't know what I feel, Lenora, but I know it belongs to you, not to a ghost. Lenora stood in the candlelight, tears drying on her cheeks, and felt something shift inside her. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of it. The first crack in a wall she had built to keep the world out. Don't lie to me again, she said. Not about being bored. Not about anything. I won't. And don't you ever call me a complication. The ghost of a smile touched his mouth. You are, though. Good night, Lucian. Good night, Lenora. She walked out, and for the first time, the blue room didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a choice. The council came 3 days later. They arrived at dusk, 12 vampires in black cars filing into the grand hall of the Ashford estate like judges entering a courtroom. Aldrich Fell led them his comb-over, immaculate, his smile sharper than the silver blades the order carried. He had spent the week well. Dr. Calloway's report on Lenora's blood had been distributed to every council member. The word mender had traveled through the vampire aristocracy like a virus, and with it a hunger that had nothing to do with blood. A mender's blood could heal silver wounds. A mender's blood properly extracted and processed could make an army invincible, or it could be weaponized, turned into a toxin that would dissolve vampire tissue from the inside out. Lenora Bellamy was the most valuable human being on the planet, and she was currently sleeping in a guest bedroom. Aldrich wanted her. The law is clear, he said, standing at the center of the grand hall, his voice carrying to every corner. The council sat in a semicircle of high-backed chairs. Lucian stood at the head, his face carved from stone. A human residing within a vampire estate must be approved by the council, or the human must demonstrate value sufficient to justify the security risk. She is my guest, Lucian said, under my protection. Your protection is not the issue, Aldrich replied, and the courtesy in his voice was as thin as tissue paper. The issue is precedent. If every vampire king sheltered every stray human who stumbled into our world, our secrecy would collapse within a decade. The human must be evaluated, or she must be surrendered to the council for safekeeping. The word safekeeping sat in the air like a coiled snake. You want to cage her, Lucian said quietly. Extract her blood. Use it. I want to protect the coven, Aldrich said. As should you. The hall buzzed with whispered debate. Council members traded glances. The political fault lines were visible, some loyal to Lucian, some seduced by Aldrich's promises, some simply afraid. Lucian opened his mouth to speak. I'll do it. The voice came from the doorway. Lenora Bellamy stood at the entrance to the grand hall wearing the red velvet dress and an expression that could have stopped a charging bull. She had heard the cars arrive. She had listened at the top of the stairs. She had understood enough. She walked into the room. 12 pairs of ancient predatory eyes tracked her movement. She could feel their attention like heat from an open furnace. She stopped in the center of the semicircle. She looked at Aldrich Fell. You want me to prove my value, she said. Fine. Lenora the Lucian started. I've got this. She didn't look at him. She looked at the council, at 12 creatures who had lived for centuries, who had ruled from shadows, who had built empires on blood and secrecy. You're afraid of me, she said. 12 vampires, some of you older than this country, and you're afraid of a waitress from Elm Street. That tells me more about you than it tells you about me. The room went absolutely still. I know what a mender is, Lenora continued. I've read your own medical text. My blood can heal silver wounds. It's the only thing that can. And right now, from what I've read in Dr. Calloway's case files, you lose an average of 11 vampires per year to silver injuries. 11 lives that could be saved. She paused. Let the number sit. You can cage me, extract my blood, turn me into a resource. And you'll get maybe a few liters before my body gives out because mender blood doesn't regenerate if the host is under duress. Your own research says that. Page 217. Aldrich's smile faltered. Or Lenora said, you can let me stay, willingly. As a medical practitioner, not a prisoner. I have 2 years of nursing training. I learn fast. I already extracted a silver fragment from one of your guards 3 days ago. He's fully healed. You can ask him. She looked around the room, meeting every pair of eyes. I'm offering you something you can't buy and can't steal. A mender who wants to help. All I'm asking in return is the right to exist. Silence. Lucian stood behind her. She couldn't see his face, but she could feel his presence like a wall of heat at her back. Aldrich looked at the council. We will vote. The vote was 7-5. Lenora stayed. Aldrich's jaw tightened as the final hand was raised. He had lost. Publicly. At the hands of a human woman who had quoted his own research back at him. He caught Lucian's eye across the room. Something passed between them. An understanding that this was not over. That this was in fact just beginning. The week that followed was the closest thing to peace Lenore had known in years. Lucian began to open slowly the way a vault opens one tumbler at a time. He told her about the centuries, not all of them, but pieces, the wars, the plagues, the way time stretches when you live forever, becoming not a river but an ocean, flat and featureless, with no shore in sight. Lenora taught him to make pancakes. He had never eaten human food. He didn't need to. But he stood in the vast industrial kitchen of the estate, sleeves rolled up, flour on his fingers, and followed her instructions with the serious concentration of a man defusing a bomb. The first pancake was a disaster, burned black on one side, raw on the other. You lived through the French Revolution, Lenora said, and you can't flip a pancake. The French Revolution was easier, Lucian replied. There were fewer variables. She laughed. It surprised both of them. The sound echoed off the stone walls, bright and strange, and Lucian looked at her as though he was hearing music for the first time. One evening she changed his bandages. An old wound on his forearm, silver from a skirmish decades ago, that had never fully healed. She unwrapped the gauze with steady hands, cleaned the wound with antiseptic, and applied fresh dressing. When her fingers touched the edge of the scar, the tissue shimmered. The wound, which had been an angry red for 30 years, faded to pink, then to white, then to nothing. They both stared at his arm. It's gone, Lucian whispered. Lenora looked at her hands. I didn't do anything. I just touched it. Mender blood, he said. It doesn't just work through transfusion. It works through contact. He looked at her. She looked at him. The air between them was charged heavy with something neither of them was ready to name. We should be careful, he said softly. Too late for that, she replied. They were not careful enough. At 3:17 in the morning, 3 weeks after Lenora Bellamy texted the wrong number, the perimeter sensors of the Ashford estate activated. Lenora was asleep in the blue room. Lucian was in his study reading. Whitmore was in the kitchen, performing his nightly inventory. The first explosion shook the house to its foundations. A silver charge detonated at the main gate, ripped the iron apart like paper. The blast wave shattered every window on the ground floor, sending a cascade of glass into the foyer like a crystalline avalanche. Lucian was at the window in a heartbeat. He looked out into the darkness. Floodlights blazed across the grounds, illuminating figures moving through the breach. Tactical gear, silver weapons, military precision, the order. Behind them a second wave, vampires. Aldrich's loyalists moving in formation, flanking the human hunters. A coalition of enemies united by greed. And at the rear, limping but upright, his broken arm still in a cast, pointing toward the house with his good hand, Kyle Daggett. Lucian's phone buzzed. A text from Aldrich fell. Apologies, my lord. The council has reconsidered. Lucian looked at the message. His face didn't change, but his eyes went dark. The gray bled away, replaced by something ancient and black, and absolutely without mercy. He pressed the intercom. Whitmore, code black, protect the mender. I'm going downstairs. Then he walked to the grand staircase, adjusted his cuffs, and descended into the war. Lenora woke to the sound of the world ending. The explosion hit the house like a fist, shaking the walls, rattling the windows, sending the crystal carafe on her bedside table crashing to the floor. She was out of bed before the glass finished breaking, bare feet hitting cold stone, her hands already reaching for something to hold on to. The second blast was closer, deeper. She felt it in her teeth. The blue room's windows shattered inward. Lenora threw her arms over her face and dropped to the floor as glass sprayed across the room like shrapnel, shards embedded in the velvet wallpaper. The curtains billowed inward, torn, letting in the smell of smoke and rain, and something chemical, sharp and metallic like pennies left on a hot stove. Silver. She recognized the smell from the medical text. She crawled to the wardrobe, pulled on shoes, grabbed the heaviest thing she could find, a brass candlestick from the mantelpiece, and moved to the door. Whitmore was already there. He stood in the corridor, his butler's composure cracked for the first time since she'd known him. His tie was askew. There was a cut on his forehead, leaking blood that was too dark to be human. Miss Bellamy, you need to come with me now. What's happening? The estate is under attack, Mr. Ashford is engaging the threat. My orders are to keep you safe. Below them through the floor, Lenore heard sounds that would live in her nightmares for years. The crack of gunfire, the shriek of metal on stone, and underneath it all, a snarling, low guttural and vast that was not a sound any human throat could produce. Where is he? Lenore demanded. Downstairs. Miss Bellamy, please. Is he alone? Whitmore's jaw tightened. He has the loyal guard. But the attackers there are hunters and vampires working together. Aldrich Fell has turned the council. This was planned. Another explosion, closer. The chandelier in the corridor swayed violently, crystals clinking like wind chimes in a hurricane. Lenore made a decision. It was not the safe decision. It was not the smart decision. It was the decision of a woman who had spent 4 years being protected by no one and had finally found someone worth protecting back. Take me to the medical wing, she said. Miss Bellamy. Whitmore. Her voice was the clinical voice, the one that had commanded vampires. There are going to be wounded, probably already are. Dr. Calloway is compromised. She reported my blood to Aldrich, which means she's either a traitor or a hostage. Either way, there is no doctor in this house right now. There's me. Take me to the medical wing. Whitmore stared at her for 3 seconds. Then he nodded. They moved through the house at speed. The quarters that had been silent and elegant 3 hours ago were transformed. Smoke drifted along the ceiling. Emergency lights cast everything in a red wash. Twice Lenore heard footsteps that weren't theirs running fast and human, and Whitmore pressed her against the wall, shielding her with his body until the sound passed. They reached the medical wing. It was intact. The reinforced walls had held. Whitmore punched a code into the keypad, and the door hissed open. Inside, 2 wounded vampires were already on gurneys brought in by guards who looked barely better off. Silver burns, shrapnel wounds. One had a piece of rebar through his thigh. Lenore didn't hesitate. She washed her hands. She pulled on gloves. She went to work. She worked the way she had been trained to work 2 years ago and 3 lifetimes ago in a classroom where the simulations were fake, but the skills were real. Triage first. Stabilize the worst. Stop the bleeding. Remove the silver. The vampire with the rebar was screaming. She talked to him the way she would talk to any patient, firm, calm, constant. Look at me. I need you to breathe. I know it hurts. I'm going to count to 3, and then I'm going to pull this out. Do not move. 1, 2. She pulled on 2. She had learned that trick from a paramedic at Ridgemont. If you tell them 3, they tense up at 3. You go on 2 when they're still bracing. The rebar came free. Blood, dark, thick, not quite human, poured from the wound. Lenora packed it with gauze, applied pressure, and reached for the suture kit. More wounded arrived. A stream of broken bodies carried through the reinforced door. She moved between gurneys, her slippers soaked in blood that wasn't red, her nightgown stained beyond saving. She extracted silver fragments with tweezers. She sutured wounds that would have killed a human 3 times over. She talked constantly because silence in a trauma ward was the sound of giving up. Whitmore watched her. So did the guards. So did every conscious vampire in the room. They watched a human woman with broken ribs and bare hands hold their world together with gauze and willpower. 2 floors below Lucian Ashford was a hurricane. The foyer of the estate was a ruin. The grand staircase was cracked down the center. The marble floor was carpeted with broken glass, overturned furniture, and bodies. Some were hunters in tactical black. Some were vampires in council gray. All were still. Lucian moved through them like a force of nature. He was not fighting the way humans fight, with calculation, with strategy, with the measured application of violence. He was fighting the way a storm fights. Instinct and fury in 3 centuries of predatory evolution condensed into a body that was faster than sight and stronger than steel. A hunter raised a silver crossbow. Lucian closed the distance in a blink, snapped the weapon in half, and threw the man through a wall. 2 council vampires lunged from opposite sides. Lucian caught one by the throat, used him as a shield against the other, and then drove both into the stone floor with a force that cracked the marble beneath them. But they kept coming. Aldrich had planned well. The hunters carried silver-tipped ammunition, the only thing that could genuinely hurt a vampire of Lucian's age. And they weren't aiming to kill with each shot. They were aiming to bleed, to weaken, to drain him by 1,000 cuts. A silver bolt caught Lucian in the left shoulder. He ripped it out without slowing, but the wound didn't close. It burned. Silver toxicity spreading through the tissue like acid eating at him from the inside. Another bolt. Right thigh. He stumbled, kept moving, killed the archer with a backhand that sent the man's body spinning across the foyer. A third bolt. Left side. between the ribs. Lucian dropped to one knee. The pain was a white-hot wire threaded through his chest. Silver in the bloodstream, silver eating at the tissue around his heart. His vision blurred at the edges. His hands shook. He had not been this badly wounded in over a century. Aldrich Fell emerged from the smoke. He was pristine, untouched. He had stayed behind his soldiers, letting them absorb the cost, letting them soften the king before he made his entrance. He was wearing a new suit. His comb-over was impeccable. "You look tired, Lucian," Aldrich said, stopping 10 feet away. Behind him, a semicircle of loyal vampires formed a wall. 300 years, and this is how it ends. On your knees, over a human. Lucian looked up. His eyes were black. Not the gray that darkened to charcoal, fully, completely black, the way the ocean looks at midnight. "She is not just a human," Lucian rasped. "No," Aldrich agreed. "She's a mender, a resource, one you would have wasted on sentiment. The council has voted Lucian, 11-1. Your regency is over." "The council didn't vote. You bought them. The way you buy everything." Aldrich smiled. "Does it matter?" He gestured. Two of his guards stepped forward carrying silver chains. "Restrain him. We'll deal with the transfer of power after dawn. As for the mender, bring her to me. Alive. I want the blood undamaged." Lucian tried to rise. His left leg buckled. The silver in his system was shutting down his muscles one by one, a slow paralysis that crept outward from every wound. He was going to lose. For the second time in his existence, he was going to lose someone in this house because he wasn't strong enough to stop it. Elise, he thought, not again. Then a voice cut through the smoke. "Get away from him." Lenora stood at the top of the ruined staircase. She was covered in blood. None of it was hers. Her nightgown was torn. Her hair was wild. She was holding a surgical kit in one hand and a bag of plasma in the other. She looked like a field medic who had wandered out of a war zone, which in a sense she was. She had left the medical wing when the stream of wounded stopped. Not because the fighting was over, but because the guards carrying the wounded had stopped coming, which meant either the battle was won or the people carrying the wounded were dead. She had followed the sound of combat, through the smoke, down the shattered staircase, into the ruin of the foyer, and she had found Lucian on his knees with silver in his blood and a traitor standing over him. Aldrich Fell turned to look at her. His expression was the expression of a man who has found a butterfly on his windshield, mildly annoyed, faintly amused. "Ah," he said, "the mender, you've saved me the trouble of fetching you." "I said get away from him." "Or what?" Aldrich tilted his head. "You'll bleed on me." Lenora walked down the stairs. Her hands were steady. Her ribs were screaming. She had been on her feet for 2 hours lifting, pulling, working, but she had rediscovered something in the medical wing that Kyle Daggett had spent 4 years trying to beat out of her. She was not helpless. She had never been helpless. She had been trapped and tired and alone. But helpless was a word for people who had nothing to offer, and Lenora Bellamy had hands that could heal what nothing else could. She reached the bottom of the stairs. She walked past Aldrich's guards, who watched her with the bewildered stillness of predators encountering prey that refused to run. She knelt beside Lucian. His skin was gray, not the elegant pale of a vampire, a sick ashen gray. The silver wounds were spreading, black veins spidering out from each entry point, creeping toward his chest. "How many bolts?" she asked. "3. His voice was a rasp. "Left shoulder, right thigh, left side. The one in your side is closest to the heart. That's the one that's killing you." "I'm aware." She opened the surgical kit. Her hands moved with the automatic precision of training so deeply embedded it had survived 4 years of abuse and neglect. She found the tweezers, the antiseptic, the gauze. "This is going to hurt," she said. "Everything you do hurts," Lucian whispered. But his eyes found hers, and in the black depths she saw something she hadn't expected. Trust. Lenora probed the wound in his side. The silver bolt had fragmented on entry 3 pieces embedded in the intercostal muscles between his 6th and 7th ribs. She could feel them with the tweezers hot and jagged, pulsing with a dull silver light. She extracted the first fragment. Lucian hissed through his teeth but didn't move. The second, deeper. She had to press harder, and the sound he made was animal and raw. "One more," she said. "Breathe." "I don't breathe." "Then hold still." She went deep. Found the last fragment lodged against the pleural wall millimeters from his heart. She gripped it, pulled. It came free with a wet sucking sound, and Lucian exhaled a sound like a dam breaking. But the damage was done. The silver had been in his system too long. The black veins were still spreading. The wounds weren't closing. His body was shutting down. Lenora looked at her hands, covered in his blood, dark, thick, cold. She thought of the guard whose wound had healed when she touched it. She thought of Lucian's scar that vanished under her fingers. She thought of every page of Dr. Calloway's research she had memorized in the library and the one line that had burned itself into her mind. Mender blood administered through direct contact with compromised tissue can accelerate regeneration by a factor of 40. The host must give willingly. Blood taken by force carries no healing properties. She looked at Lucian. "I'm going to do something," she said, "and you're going to let me." Lenora, she took the scalpel from the surgical kit. She drew it across her left palm. A clean cut, deep enough to bleed freely. The pain was sharp and immediate, a thin, bright line that cut through the fog of adrenaline. Her blood welled up, red, warm, alive. She pressed her bleeding palm against the wound in Lucian's side. The reaction was instantaneous, light. Not the cold silver glow of toxicity, something warmer. Golden. It pulsed from the point of contact, spreading through the black veins like dawn breaking across a poisoned sky. The darkness retreated, the tissue knit. The wound closed, new skin forming over raw flesh like water flowing over stone. Lucian gasped, his back arched, his hands gripped the broken marble floor so hard his fingers left gouges in the stone. The light spread to the shoulder wound, closed it, moved to the thigh. Closed that too. And then it kept going, deeper, into his blood, into his bones. Lenora felt it a pull, like her blood was being drawn through her skin by a current flowing into him, healing him, filling the cracks that 300 years had carved into his body. It was too much. She tried to pull her hand away. She couldn't. Her vision tunneled. The room spun. She was giving too much. Her body was a vessel being drained, and if she didn't stop, Lucian's hand closed over hers. He pulled her palm away from his skin, gently, firmly. He sat up, his wounds healed, his eyes clearing, from black to gray, and he looked at her with an expression that held more emotion than she had seen in his face in 3 weeks. "Enough," he said. "Lenora, enough." She swayed. He caught her. His arms were warm now, not cold, not the permanent winter of undead flesh, but warm with her blood running through his veins. "I'm okay," she said. She wasn't. Her head was swimming. But she was conscious, and he was healed, and that was enough. "I didn't take it," Lucian said. His voice was fierce, desperate. "You gave it. Tell me you know that." "I know." "I would never I know, Lucian. I gave it because I chose to. Not because you asked. Not because you needed it. Because I chose." He looked at her. The king of the city, the apex predator, the 300-year-old monster, looked at a 26-year-old waitress from Elm Street as though she had just rearranged the stars. "Now get up," Lenora said, "and finish this." Lucian rose. The effect of Mender blood on a vampire of his age was something the medical texts had theorized about but never observed. It was not simply healing, it was amplification. Every sense sharpened, every muscle surged. His body, which had been operating at the baseline of immortal capability for 3 centuries, suddenly remembered what it was like to burn at full power. He felt the heartbeat of every person in the room. He heard the rasp of Aldrich's breath 6 rooms away. He smelled the silver on the hunters' weapons and the fear in their sweat. Aldrich Fell had retreated the moment the golden light erupted from Lenora's hand. He had recognized it. He had read the same texts. And he knew with the cold certainty of a mathematician watching an equation resolve that he had approximately 90 seconds before Lucian Ashford came for him. He ran. He didn't get far. Lucian moved through the ruined estate like a shadow thrown by lightning. The loyal guards, 6 of them, the ones who had held the line while their king fell, cleared a path. The hunters who remained standing dropped their weapons and put their hands up. They were soldiers, not zealots. They could smell the change in the air. Aldrich made it to the east wing before Lucian caught him. The vampire king didn't run. He walked. Each step deliberate, each step echoing through the stone corridor with the weight of a sentence being handed down. Aldrich turned. His back was against the wall. His composure, the smug political composure he had worn like armor for 2 centuries, was gone. Underneath it was something small and pale and afraid. "Lucian," he said, "let's discuss this. I was protecting the coven. The Mender is too valuable to be left in the hands of... You tried to take her. I tried to secure a resource. You tried to take her." Lucian's voice was quiet. The quiet before the ground opens. "You aligned with hunters. You sold the location of my estate to humans who carry silver weapons. You compromised the secrecy of our kind. You violated every oath you swore when you took your council seat." He stopped 3 feet from Aldrich. "And you called her a resource." Aldrich's mouth opened. No sound came out. Lucian raised his hand. His fingers were steady. His eyes were gray and clear and absolutely without pity. And then from behind him a voice. Don't kill him. Lenora was there, leaning against the wall of the corridor, pale, one hand pressed against her side where her ribs throbbed, the other holding the brass candlestick she had grabbed a lifetime ago. She had followed him. Of course she had. He deserves it, Lucian said, not turning around. Probably, but killing him makes you a tyrant. Punishing him makes you a king. She paused, breathed through the pain. Prove why you're the one sitting on the throne, Lucian. Not because you're the strongest, because you're the best. Lucian stood still for a long time. The corridor was silent except for Aldrich's ragged breathing and the distant sound of the rain. Then he lowered his hand. Aldrich fell, Lucian said. You are stripped of your council seat. Your assets are frozen. Your territories are dissolved. You are sentenced to exile. Not death. Something worse. He leaned close. Silence. You will live in a place where no one knows your name. No one answers your calls. No court, no council, no audience. You will live for centuries with nothing but the memory of the power you threw away because you thought a waitress from Elm Street was beneath you. Aldrich's face crumbled. Take him, Lucian said to the guards who had appeared behind him. Now. They dragged Aldrich away. He didn't fight. He didn't speak. The silence of his sentence had already begun. Lenora found Kyle in the garden. She hadn't been looking for him. She was walking through the aftermath, helping the wounded, directing the guards to carry the injured to the medical wing. The rain had stopped. The first gray light of dawn was creeping over the eastern wall of the estate, and the grounds looked like a battlefield from a history book, cratered, smoking, littered with debris. Kyle was sitting against the garden wall, his broken arm cradled in his lap, a silver pistol lying in the mud beside him. He had been given the gun by Rook. He had been told to find Lenora. He had been told to finish what he started. He hadn't fired a single shot. Because when the explosions began, and the vampires started fighting and the screaming started, Kyle Daggett had discovered something about himself that all bullies eventually discover. He was a coward. He was brave in kitchens and bathrooms and apartments where the only witness was a woman half his size. But in a war surrounded by creatures that could tear him apart without effort, he was nothing. A small, drunk, broken man sitting in the mud. He looked up and saw Lenora standing above him. She was covered in blood. Her nightgown was destroyed. There were dark circles under her eyes and a bruise on her forehead from a piece of falling plaster. She looked nothing like the woman he had controlled for 4 years. She looked like someone he didn't recognize. Nora, he whispered. He used the name he had always used, the diminutive, the leash. Don't call me that. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for any of this. I just wanted. You wanted me back. Lenora's voice was flat, empty of anger, empty of fear, empty of everything she had once felt for him, which was the most terrifying thing Kyle Daggett had ever experienced. You wanted me back in that apartment, on that floor, waiting for you to decide whether tonight was a good night or a bad night. I loved you, Kyle said, and he might have even believed it. No, you owned me. There's a difference. I know that now. She looked at the silver pistol in the mud. She looked at Kyle's cast. She looked at the man who had broken her ribs and nearly killed her, and then sold her location to a paramilitary organization because he couldn't stand the idea that she had escaped. I'm not afraid of you anymore, Kyle. You're just a man with a broken arm and no one left to hit. She turned and walked away. Behind her, 2 of Lucian's guards materialized from the shadows and lifted Kyle Daggett to his feet. He didn't resist. There was nothing left in him to resist with. Lenora didn't look back. It was Sawyer who arrived at noon. Whitmore had contacted him 12 hours earlier at Lucian's instruction and sent a car. Sawyer Bellamy, 6'1", 2 tours in Afghanistan, built like a man who had been tested by the worst the world could offer, and had walked through the shattered gates of the Ashford estate, looked at the craters and the broken glass and the dark stains on the gravel, and said exactly one word. Nora. She ran to him. She hadn't run in weeks, her ribs wouldn't allow it, but she ran now across the gravel drive and threw herself into her brother's arms with a force that made both of them gasp. He held her. He didn't speak. He just held her, his chin on top of her head, his arms locked around her, and let her shake. I'm okay, she said into his chest. I'm okay, Sawyer. You're covered in blood. It's not mine, most of it. He pulled back. He looked at her face, the fading bruise, the healing lip, the new cut on her forehead, and underneath it all, something he hadn't seen in her eyes for 4 years. Strength. Where is he? Sawyer asked. His voice carried the quiet promise that had made Kyle Daggett back away from his door. The one who did this to you. Which one, either? Kyle is in custody. He'll be turned over to the police with enough evidence to put him away. She paused. The other one, the one who saved me, is inside. Sawyer looked up at the Gothic manor looming above them. His expression said everything. It's a long story, Lenora said. I've got time. Lucian appeared in the doorway. He had changed into a clean suit. His wounds were healed, though a faint shadow lingered under his eyes, the only trace of the night's violence. He looked at Sawyer with the measured assessment of a man who recognized a fellow predator. Sawyer looked back with the expression of a man who didn't care how old, rich, or powerful you were if you had hurt his sister. You must be the brother, Lucian said, and you must be the wrong number. A beat. Then Lucian extended his hand. Sawyer took it. The handshake lasted exactly 3 seconds, long enough to communicate respect, short enough to communicate that the jury was still out. Take care of her, Sawyer said. It was not a request. I intend to. And if you don't, I don't care what you are. I'll find a way. Lucian almost smiled. I believe you. The truth about the phone number came to light 3 days later. Whitmore discovered it. He had been conducting a forensic analysis of the night's events, cataloging the damage, the casualties, the chain of intelligence that had led Rook in the order to the estate. During the process, he had traced the phone number that Lenore had texted. He brought the findings to Lucian's study. The number, sir, 5500199. What about it? It was decommissioned in 1987. It hasn't been active in nearly 40 years. By all accounts, a text message sent to that number should have bounced. It should have returned an error notification to the sender. Lucian set down his pen. But it didn't. No, sir, it delivered directly to your current device. That's not possible. My current number is entirely different. I know, sir. Whitmore paused. The old vampire's face held something Lenora would have recognized as the same expression he wore when she had identified Dr. Calloway from a 100-year-old photograph. Recognition, wonder, a touch of fear. The number, sir, 5550199. I checked it against our historical records. He placed a single sheet of paper on the desk. It was registered in 1802 to a resident of this estate. Lucian looked at the paper. His face went very still. The number belonged to the household line of this property, the line that was used exclusively by the occupant of the Blue Room. A long silence. It was Elise's number, Lucian whispered. Yes, sir, it was Elise Marchand's number, the line she used to communicate with you when you were away from the estate. It was disconnected after her death in 1824 and never reassigned. Lucian stared at the paper. His hands, which had been steady through a battle and a century of solitude, trembled. A message sent to a dead woman's number, he said slowly, delivered to me 200 years later. I have no explanation, sir. The telecom records show no forwarding, no rerouting, no technical pathway by which that message should have reached you. Lucian stood. He walked to the window. The garden below was scarred from the attack, but the oak trees still stood. They had stood for 300 years. They would stand for 300 more. She sent her to me, he said quietly. Elise, somehow, she sent her to me. Whitmore said nothing. Some things were beyond the reach of even the most loyal servant's counsel. Lucian found Lenora in the library. She was reading as usual. A text on advanced wound care bookmarked and annotated in her small, precise handwriting. She looked up when he entered, and something in his face made her set the book down. What is it? He told her. He told her about the number, about Elise. About the impossible delivery of a message through a deadline to a living phone across 2 centuries of silence. Lenora listened. Her eyes filled, but the tears didn't fall. She had learned in the past 3 weeks that tears were for grief, and this wasn't grief. This was something else, something larger. Maybe it wasn't a wrong number, she said. No, Lucian agreed. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe she knew, wherever she is. Maybe she knew you were alone, and she knew I was in trouble, and she found a way. Lucian sat beside her, not across a 20-foot dining table, not behind a desk, beside her on the leather sofa in the library, close enough that their shoulders touched. I spent 200 years believing I failed her, he said, that I wasn't fast enough, wasn't strong enough. You didn't fail her, Lucian. You just weren't finished yet. He turned to look at her, this woman, this impossible, stubborn, brilliant, bruised woman who had walked into his world through a crack in a phone screen and refused to leave. He took her hand. His skin was warm, still warm from her blood. He pressed his lips to her palm, right over the cut that had healed to a thin white line, right over the lifeline. Thank you, he said, for texting the wrong number. Thank you for answering. 6 months later, the Ashford estate had been rebuilt. The gates were new, taller, reinforced with alloys that wouldn't shatter under a silver charge. The gardens had been replanted, the windows replaced. The foyer floor cracked and stained with the blood of a night that had nearly ended. Everything had been relaid in fresh marble. But the house felt different, not because of the renovations, because the curtains were open. For the first time in 3 centuries, sunlight poured through the tall windows of the Ashford estate, filling the corridors with warmth. Lucian didn't need it. Sunlight didn't harm vampires, that was another myth. But he had kept the curtains drawn for 200 years because the light reminded him of things he had lost. Lenora had opened them on her second month in the house. She had walked through every room, pulled back every curtain, and let the sun in. Enough darkness, she had said, and that was that. She was no longer in the blue room. She had moved to the east wing, into a suite. She had chosen herself close to the library and the medical wing. Her closet was half velvet dresses and half medical scrubs. She wore the scrubs more. She had gone back to school, not Ridgemont Community College, a private program funded through a scholarship that Whitmore had arranged with a discretion so total that Lenora would never find Lucian's name on any document. The program was unique, a medical training track designed for practitioners who would serve the supernatural community. Lenora was its first and only student. She was top of her class, again, as she had always been. Dr. Calloway was gone. She had been given a choice exile with Aldrich or testimony before the council in exchange for leniency. She chose testimony. She was now practicing in a clinic in Eastern Europe, far from the Ashford estate, far from the woman whose blood she had betrayed. Lenora didn't hate her. She understood the chain of command. She understood fear. But she didn't forgive her either. Some things take longer than 6 months. Aldrich Fell lived in a cottage in northern Scotland. Alone, no phone, no visitors, no power. The council had enforced Lucian's sentence to the letter. Aldrich, who had once commanded rooms with his voice, now spoke only to the wind. The punishment was exquisite in its cruelty, not violence, not death, but irrelevance. For a man who had craved attention like oxygen, silence was a suffocation that would last for centuries. Kyle Daggett was in a state penitentiary, 8 years. Aggravated assault, domestic battery, illegal weapons possession, and conspiracy charges connected to his involvement with the order. Rook had vanished, and the order had fractured without his leadership, scattering into cells that Lucian's people were dismantling one by one. Kyle sat in a cell. No one visited, no one wrote. The woman he had tried to own had become someone he couldn't reach, couldn't touch, couldn't even comprehend. She lived in a mansion. She healed vampires. She stood beside a king. And she had done it not because anyone had given it to her, but because she had earned every single inch of it with her own 2 hands. Vivian Duval had left the country the morning after the attack. She had not participated in the violence. She had not helped Aldrich. But she had known, and she had stayed silent, and that silence carried a weight she could not put down. Before she left, she slipped an envelope under Lenora's door, inside a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was elegant, centuries old. He loved Elise, but Elise was gentle and the world broke her. You are not gentle. You are a storm. Take care of him. I couldn't. Lenora kept the letter in the drawer of her bedside table. She read it once a week, not for comfort, for perspective. On a Tuesday evening in October, Lenora was in the medical wing reviewing case files. She had treated 14 vampires and 3 lichens in the past month, silver extractions, blood compatibility consultations, a werewolf with a broken femur that wouldn't set because of a rare silver alloy contamination. She had solved it by developing a saline flush infused with trace amounts of her own blood, diluted, controlled, administered with clinical precision. The femur healed in 6 hours. She had published the protocol. Anonymously, it was now standard practice in 3 covens across the country. Lucian found her at her desk, surrounded by charts and coffee cups. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her the way he had watched her on the first night, with an intensity that could have powered a city. You're working late. I'm always working late. You should eat. You should eat. When's the last time you fed? A pause. Tuesday. It's Tuesday. Last Tuesday. Lenora set down her pen. She looked at him. 6 months ago, she had been a waitress on a bathroom floor. Now she was looking at the king of the city's supernatural order with the expression of a woman who was not impressed by crowns. Have you eaten my pancakes? She asked. Your pancakes are a crime against flour. My pancakes are perfect, and you know it. The corner of his mouth twitched. It was as close to a grin as Lucian Ashford ever got. Come upstairs, he said. I have something to show you. He led her to the library. On the desk where her medical text usually sat there was a small velvet box. If that's a ring, we need to have a conversation about pacing, Lenora said. It's not a ring. She opened it. Inside, on a bed of black silk, was a silver key, old, ornate, engraved with a symbol she recognized from the estate's crest. It's the master key, Lucian said. It opens every door in this house, every room, every vault, every archive, every secret I have. Lenora looked at the key, then at him. You're giving me access to everything. I'm giving you a choice. You can stay as a guest, protected, comfortable, or you can stay as an equal, with full knowledge of what this house contains, what this world requires, and what it will cost. What will it cost? Everything. It always does. Lenora lifted the key from the box. It was heavy, cold. It warmed in her hand. I was a waitress 6 months ago, she said. Before that, I was a nursing student. Before that, I was a girl from a family that didn't have much. I've never had a key to anything worth locking. She closed her fist around it. But I've never been afraid of doors. Lucian exhaled. It was a sound she had never heard him make before. Relief, pure unguarded relief. There's one more thing, he said. Of course there is. Your phone, Biao. He held it up, the shattered screen, the device she had carried from the bathroom floor, through the rain, through the war. He had kept it. It received a message this morning. He handed it to her. She looked at the screen, a text from an unknown number. Please help me. He won't let me leave. Lenora's breath caught. She read the message again. The desperate grammar. The abbreviated panic. The echo of her own words sent from a different floor in a different city by a different woman trapped in the same nightmare. She looked up at Lucian. Can you trace this number? Already done. Apartment complex on the south side. 14th floor. How far? 20 minutes. Lenora set down the key. She picked up her coat. Then let's go. Lucian smiled. It was a real smile, the kind that showed the tips of his elongated canines and crinkled the corners of his ancient eyes, and made him look for just a moment like a man who had found a reason to keep going. I'll drive, he said. They walked out together, through the sunlit corridors, past the open curtains, down the grand staircase that had been rebuilt from the rubble. The Aston Martin was waiting in the drive. Lucian opened the passenger door. Lenora slid in. He rounded the car, climbed behind the wheel, and started the engine. As the car pulled away from the estate, Lenora looked at the shattered phone one last time. The screen was cracked beyond repair. But the message was clear. She had texted the wrong number, and it had led her to exactly the right place. And that is the story of how a broken phone and a single wrong digit rewrote the fate of a waitress, a king, in a world that exists just beneath the skin of the one you know. Lenora Bellamy went from a victim on a linoleum floor to the healer of a kingdom. Not because she was chosen, not because she was rescued, but because when the universe sent her a door, she walked through it with both hands open and refused to stop. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? We carry these devices in our pockets every day, connected to 8 billion people. One typo, one slip of the thumb, and your desperate plea could land in the inbox of a delivery driver, a grandmother, or a 300-year-old king who has been waiting 2 centuries for someone brave enough to need him. Lucian Ashford was not a good man. He said so himself many times in many ways. But sometimes when the world is full of real-life monsters, the ones who smile at you in kitchens and lock the doors behind you, a good man isn't what you need. You need a protector who owns the dark. And sometimes the dark needs a protector too. Check the number before you hit send, or maybe just maybe don't.